Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Oroville Dam Citizens Advisory Commission meeting. My name is Wade Crowfoot, and I serve as our California Natural Resources Secretary. I chair this commission. This is the 18th meeting of this commission since it was established under state law. We have 2 hours for today's meeting and will conclude at noon. Today's meeting is the final meeting of this year, 2024, and our next meeting will be held in March of this coming year, 2025. We've held 2 of this year's meetings virtually in keeping with our governor's call to curtail travel and expenses under the current budget forecast. And I think at least one of those meetings has been in person. It's great to be with everyone this morning. I'm sorry to have missed the August meeting, but thank our Department of Water Resources Director, Carla Namath, for stepping in and chairing the meeting on my behalf. I heard the Commission received a lot of informative presentations on dam safety and several other items. We have a full agenda as normal, and I want to begin with some important housekeeping items. As always, the meeting will be recorded and posted to our commission's website for anybody who wants to go back and review our discussion. And importantly, before we really begin the crux of the meeting, I want to take a moment and acknowledge the tragedy that happened at the Feather River Adventist School in Oroville, and express my and our heartfelt condolences to the students, the faculty and staff, and the families of the Feather River and Greater Oroville community. With heavy hearts, we learned about that tragedy, and we stand in support and solidarity with everyone. So to kick off our meeting, I'm going to ask our colleague Tara Alpaugh from Kearns and West to do a quick roll call for the commissioners and take this opportunity to thank Tara and Eva and the Kearns and West team for doing a remarkably competent job, really serving as our organizers of this meeting to help these meetings happen so effectively. So Tara, I'm going to turn it over to you for roll call.
Thanks, Secretary Crowfoot. Good morning, everyone. When I call your name, please indicate you're present. And if you're stepping in for someone on my list, please state your name clearly for our record. So first, we have California Natural Resources Agency, Secretary Crowfoot. Assembly Member Gallagher.
Julia Cordy, sitting in for the Assembly member.
Thank you, Julia. Senator Megan Dolly's designee.
Yeah, this is Bruce Ross, in and out, with Senator Megan Daly's office. And we also have Tasha Weaver here with us as well.
Thank you, Bruce and Tasha. Department of Water Resources.
Good morning. This is John Yarbrough sitting in for Director Namath.
Thank you, John. Office of Emergency Services.
Good morning. This is Nate Ortiz sitting in for Director Ward.
Thank you, Nate. Department of Parks and Recreation.
Good morning. Matt Teague sitting in for Director Quintero.
Thank you, Matt. California Highway Patrol.
Yeah, it's Mark Stokes, Lieutenant Commander here.
Thank you. City of Oroville Mayor Pittman.
David Pittman present, and thanks for all the kind words toward the students. We have a candlelight vigil in Oroville tonight, and the community is responding very well to the students, so thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pittman. City of Oroville Vice Mayor Smith. Butte County Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Conley.
Present.
Thank you. Butte County Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Kimmelshoe.
Present.
Thank you. Butte County Board of Supervisors appointee, Commissioner Bateman.
Present.
Thank you. Sutter County Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Conan. Sutter County Board of Supervisors, Supervisor McKelly. Yuba County Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Furr. Yuba County Board of Supervisors appointee, OES Manager Marin. Butte County Sheriff's Office, Lieutenant Beller. Sutter County Sheriff's Office, Deputy Lycan. Yuba County Sheriff's Office, Operations Captain Liebarger. Thank you, everyone. We have reached a quorum of 11 commissioners. I'll hand it
So
back to
much,
the
Tara. And Mayor Pittman, it's great to hear of the supportive response from within the community up in Oroville. Just know we want to be supportive however we can, and we're just a phone call away as you continue to move forward from that tragedy. So as we heard, welcome to Senator Megan Daly and her team as she takes the reins as the senator that is helping to oversee the work of this commission. And we thank, of course, Brian Daly for all of his leadership on Oroville reservoir and dam safety issues and more broadly just across the state. I understand that Assemblymember Gallagher, who has, of course, been instrumental in both the formation and the oversight of this commission, may be joining us a little bit later, and I thank his team for being here as well. Before we get into today's agenda, I want to acknowledge a few other commissioners who are transitioning from office and therefore the commission, and thank Supervisors Conant and Michelli for their leadership and engagement in this commission over the years, and Sergeant Brian Evans from the Butte County Sheriff. We are thankful for all of their engagement and guidance and insight in this commission. I'm excited to welcome a new commissioner, Lieutenant James Beller of the Butte County Sheriff. And then next year, we will welcome several other new commissioners, including new elected officials. Looking forward to the coming year, which is just around the corner, we will be preparing the second tri-annual Oroville Dam Citizens Advisory Commission legislative report. So tri-annual means every 3 years, and part of the state legislation that formed this commission required our commission to provide a legislative report every 3 years. And this report will cover meetings held between late 2021 through next year. So each meeting during 2025 will include an update on the report process to keep commissioners apprised of the progress. I was really proud that during the sort of the creation or the completion of the first triennial report, we really did it in a way that commissioners understood how we were reporting our progress and had an opportunity to provide input. Today's agenda, as always, reflects input from this commission, and your feedback on the agenda formation helps ensure that the commission is actually addressing things that commissioners feel are important. So today we're covering several public safety topics. We'll begin with a briefing from our DWR colleagues, Mike Anderson, our state climatologist, and his colleague Molly White, on DWR's forecast and preparations for the winter water season. Over the summer, DWR ran emergency response exercises at Oroville that included both tabletop exercises as well as functional activities out in the field. And David Gordon from DWR will join us to share an overview of these activities. After his update and briefing on these activities, their emergency response exercises, I'd like to open up the floor to commissioners who represent the participating agencies in those exercises to share any reflections or takeaways or suggestions on those exercises. Importantly, the update to the Oroville Dam Water Control Manual is about to get underway. As we know, this is a really important process that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers leads to update the water control manual, effectively how the reservoir and dam are operated for flood control. And this update will outline operations of the flood storage pool, the amount of water kept behind the dam in Oroville, to minimize downstream flood risk. And as a result of what it covers and how it will update how the dam and reservoir are operated, it's obviously really important to this commission. So today we'll hear from Jenny Fromm from the U.S. Corps of Engineers to give us another update on how this is how the process is going to update the water control manual and what's the engagement process for us all to provide input. Commissioner Bateman requested to give a presentation today on the priorities for the update to this water control manual that has been drafted by a group of downstream residents and local commissioners. And Commissioner Bateman will be joined by Matt Mentick, who is a Yuba County resident and frequent contributor to the commission. And they'll give an overview of how they've articulated the priorities that they shared with the Corps earlier this year, which specifically focus on the impacts of the manual of the operations on downstream public safety. And then finally, as always, our meeting will end with public comment and a questions portion where we invite members of the community to make any remarks they would like to this commission. So before we dive into presentations, just want to turn it over to Department of Water Resources Deputy Director John Yarborough. John referenced that he's filling in today for our DWR Director Carla Namath. And John, any top level remarks you want to share?
Yeah, thank you, Secretary, and start with Director Namath sends her regards and is sorry not to be here with us today, but did ask me to provide some of these remarks on her behalf. And so, as was noted, our state climatologist, Dr. Mike Anderson, is going to be providing an overview of our forecasts as we look into what can we expect for 2025. And really, I'm thinking about this recent storm we saw here in late November. That really gave us some needed relief with that water coming in after that really extreme hot summer we saw in the hot weather in the fall. And with those storms, we actually saw the lake come up about 30 feet. So a good relief from some of that dry conditions that we had been seeing there. And we'll just note that this type of large event in the middle of a very long dry period is really the norm of what we need to be planning for, and we need to continue to be improving our ability to operate with these kinds of events. And so as we've talked about with this commission, one of the ways we're doing that is this work we've been doing with our partners at Scripps and Yuba Water, the Corps and NOAA to bring the forecasted informed reservoir operations or FIRO to Oroville. And really, as we've talked about, the idea here is we want to use the best science and forecasting to better operate this existing infrastructure we have. So we're getting even more benefits out of what we already have, and doing so in a way that keeps our commitment to public safety as our top priority. And so we anticipate getting this the final FIRO report coming up at the beginning of next year. And this report really captures this research that's been done on how can we improve our forecasting. So our other presentation today from Jenny Fromm from the Army Corps is really getting into, so what is the next step here for bringing FIRO to Oroville? And it is the update to the water control manual, where we're turning these research, the product of all of this research into the rules for how Oroville is operated during flood conditions. As we start this process for updating the water control manual, and as we've talked about at the commission, we'd really like to have a set of goals that are shared by DWR as well as the commission. And so through discussions we've had here at commission meetings, also with discussions separately with some of the commissioners and members of the community, we've come up with a set of goals here that I believe these were shared with the commissioners earlier here before this meeting. And so I want to share these 4 goals that we've come up with. And the first is we want to use the best available science and data. So we want to incorporate what we've learned through this FIRO work into the operations of Oroville. The second goal is in our water control manual. We really want to see captured all the coordination that occurs between DWR, Yuba, the Army Corps, all of these different agencies, and that coordination, want to see that captured in the manual. The third goal that we put forth was minimizing the potential use of the emergency spillway. And that's something that is important to me, but also I've heard is important to the community. We really want to not use that facility unless we're in a true extreme emergency condition. And the fourth goal that we put forth was making sure this new manual does not include Marysville Dam, this dam that was not built. So that's in the current manual. Want to see that removed there. So following this meeting, it would be helpful for me to hear whether from each of the commissioners, whether these goals, how they align with your goals for this manual update. Because again, the idea here is let's look for areas that we have some common ground here and some common perspective that we can communicate to the Corps as we go into this process here. And lastly, I'll say that as we start the water control manual process, I'm really looking forward to continuing to receive updates at this commission on this topic, because I know this is one that's really important to all of us. So thank you all very much. And Secretary, back to you.
Thanks, John. And I concur. The update of the Army Corps' update of the flood control manual is central to the work of the commission here in coming months and years. So this commission will be a really important forum to hear from the Army Corps and to continue to provide input. I appreciate you being forthright about the current priorities that DWR is articulating, and also appreciate that you're inviting input or feedback on that. Also, we remain focused on this topic of FERC relicensing as well from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission as another thing that we're tracking over time up at Oroville. At this time, I want to invite any other commissioners to share any relevant updates that they have that would be of interest to fellow commissioners. And if you'd like to share, if you can figure it out, you can raise your hand virtually, or you can just take yourself off mute. All right, then let's move on.
Secretary, it
Yes.
looks like you've got two hands, actually.
Oh, so sorry.
Lieutenant Beller and then Supervisor Conley. Oh, and then Mayor Pittman.
Okay, let's go with Lieutenant Beller. Welcome to the commission.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to say I started pretty late. I just got on a couple minutes ago, so I kind of missed what the needs were for comment. We're dealing with a critical incident from a couple days ago, so I may have to leave in the middle of the meeting, but I'll try to stay on as long as I can.
No worries, Lieutenant. And this is Secretary Crowfoot who chairs the meeting. I started by just sharing our condolences and support for you all, and particularly the first responders and those impacted by the tragedy at the school in Oroville. So however we can be helpful. And then just know that for your team, these meetings are recorded too. So if you need to jump off for law enforcement purposes at any point, and this goes really for everybody, you'll be able to circle back and have somebody review the meeting as well. Supervisor Connolly.
I wanted to thank you for your kind comments. It was very impactful to our community that such a terrible thing happened. But I would like to say it was very professionally handled by local police, our sheriff, of course, the FBI, and the investigation going on. So thank you for your kind words. Beyond that, I want to serve up a softball to Mayor David Pittman. We need to look at the Oroville levy. We've had discussions on the side, and maybe it's something we could agendize in the future. Thank you.
And Supervisor, and again, hard to get our head around what you guys are dealing with up there with this incident. But again, we're want to be supportive however we can be. And then we have an action tracker, which I'll talk about in a moment. So I just want to flag that Supervisor Connolly raised the Oroville levy as a potential topic for future discussion here at the commission. Mayor Pittman.
Yes, thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. One of the things I wanted to compliment was, if you all haven't got a chance, but your agency's floating classroom on the Feather River, run by your biologist, Jada, many of our city residents got a chance to do that on the Feather River and to understand the value of the spawning beds and the true value of the Feather River as a habitat, especially for certain species that only exist here. So I want to throw a compliment out to your agency to have those floating camps or floating classrooms. And I want to encourage every one of our commissioners to one day get that ride. It's fascinating. And I've lived in this town, born and raised here, and I never knew what the true value of this section of the river is. and as it relates to the entire species for the salmon and so on and so forth. So I recommend classroom trips when they're scheduled. Big compliments to your agency for that.
Thanks, Mayor Pittman. And, you know, this commission has organized tours, one at the Flood Control Center in Sacramento, one up at the dam. So maybe, Tara, this could be a potential optional sort of tour for commissioners to actually get out there. I would love to. I'm a little embarrassed to say I have not been on in that floating classroom. So I personally would like to do it as well. But thank you for raising that.
And thank you for providing it. It's a wonderful activity for all the kids and the school kids. They're all very proud of Oroville now, knowing the value of the river to the salmon.
It's incredible. It's an incredible river for sure. Thank
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, let's jump in and move forward. So as I mentioned, we keep this action item tracker. Big thanks to Kearns and West, our partners. And the whole notion here is we want to be accountable for what we talk about. So on that tracker is both resolved items or items that have been addressed, but also new ones that emerged from the last meeting. And after each of these meetings, including this meeting, we'll put out that action tracker. And so you're invited to look at it, provide input or suggestions or propose corrections. But again, I'm really proud of this action tracker because unlike a lot of, sort of public meetings where you talk about things but don't necessarily follow up, the tracker is meant to ensure there's follow-up. So with that, let's begin our presentations and turn it over to Molly and Mike from the Department of Water Resources to give us an update in what we're experiencing in the early part of this winter and what we might experience in coming weeks and months.
All right. Good morning, everybody. This is Mike Anderson, state climatologist with the California Department of Water Resources. Here to give you a quick overview of what we went through last year and what to expect here in the coming year. So last year ended up near average, but we got to average in any way but average, from the extremes in Southern California in January and February to the March blizzard that deposited 25% of the seasonal snowpack in a matter of days. Summer of extreme heat brings us to the new water year with all expectations of La Nina having been in place with the start of the water year. It still has not appeared, and we are far enough into the year, we will likely not have the persistence required to catalog it as a formal La Nina event. That said,
Mike, just remind us, as those of us who are not scientific, what in a couple sentences a La Nina event is and how it impacts the water year.
You bet. So La Nina is part of a oscillation in the tropical Pacific Ocean. The La Nina conditions are when the eastern tropical Pacific, so from the coast of Peru out to the international date line, is cooler than average. And when it's cooler than average, that has an impact on our wintertime circulation. Its opposite, El Nino, is when that same band of water is warmer than average. So with, as I said, even though it has not crossed the threshold of more than 0.5 degrees Celsius below average, we're still seeing a La Nina-like atmospheric circulation, which is characterized by a strong high pressure system somewhere in the Pacific. Over the first part of December, we've noticed it overhead, so we have plenty of dry days stacking up here to start beginning of what is normally the wettest time of year. The slide here shows you kind of the breakdown of a water year by how it manifests itself. In the fall, in the first couple months is when we really expect to see the fall rains start. October 1 is normally when we see it up near Crescent City. Takes all the way to Halloween to get down to San Diego. This year, actually, we did not see meaningful rains until the significant event here last month in November. Southern California is still waiting for its first meaningful precip of the year. So what that event did, call it a punctuated extreme, really took those dry soil conditions and made them very wet very quickly. It can be challenging because with that type of loading, you can get more landslides. Something to be aware of. Didn't see a whole lot of snowpack development because freezing elevations with the storms very high. Heading into December, January, February, on average, half our annual precip shows up in this 90-day window. As you've seen, we're starting off very dry, that high pressure overhead. That said, over the next 10 days, it will start to actually move to the west. And as it does so, opens the door for more precip to fall. So around middle to end of next week, things may turn significantly wet again. And with this kind of year, that 2 to 4 day event is something we really have to be mindful of, because that will be the type of storms that we have. We watch the freezing elevation very closely, because when it is high with the warm atmospheric rivers, not a lot of snowpack development. So you may end up near average in precip totals, but you've gotten it in these punctuated extremes that are not building snowpack. So it's a very different than our history would have provided. We get to spring, really understanding when that shuts off. We've had years like 2013, 2022. At the beginning of the calendar year, everything shuts off and we go really dry. So we want to watch when that will happen, because that will impact, again, how much water we get, what the snowpack ends up being, and what we have to work with as we head into summer. As we certainly saw this year, how quickly we dry out really impacts then how the landscape fares in terms of the development of fire risk, when, where, and how long the extreme heat events are in play. And we keep an eye on tropical activity now, because as we get into late summer, the winds across the mid-latitudes are starting to fall. And when that happens, that allows the tropical systems to move further north, impacting potentially Southern California, but even sometimes the remains of them getting north of the Golden Gate, coming in, and unfortunately tending to produce a lot of dry lightning, which that is a terrible time of year for that particular event to happen. Have some work going on with some colleagues, really trying to help us. Is it one dry year, or are we at the beginning of a multi-year drought? More work to be done there, but some promise early on. So kind of excited about that. And then really understanding, as we're seeing things that are very different from what you remember in your childhood, or even a few decades ago, understanding we're in a pace now where the next decade is going to be very different than a couple decades ago, and really understanding how to characterize that and help you set your frame of reference for what to expect for the water year is going to be really important. With that, happy to take any questions.
So Mike, the takeaway, the kind of the most basic question is it going to be a wet year or a dry year? Obviously, we never know for sure. Sounds like October started pretty dry. We got some good rain in Northern California, but it kind of remains to be seen where we're going to go from here.
Right, and I would call the headline mostly dry with punctuated wet extremes. So how you manage those few big storms really tells the tale of how the rest of the year goes, in terms of whether you're managing it on a drought perspective, at the same time trying to mitigate the flood consequences of those extremes.
Got it. And Mike, this might not be a question for you, but I don't know if John or somebody here could answer this. In the context of the Oroville Reservoir, obviously it's our largest state operated reservoir, and it's critically important for flood control, obviously, as well as water supply. So how are we looking good in terms of how the sort of the levels of Lake Oroville right now to be able to absorb those big atmospheric rivers if they do come?
Yeah, thank you, Secretary. So so right now we've got a lot of room in the reservoir to take in some more of these storms. So we still have a lot of room before we get into the flood space. And so then that's where, as we get into that flood space, where we're really working with the Army Corps and we're looking out through forecasting what are storms, what are events we're seeing on the horizon. So even today we're using that forward-looking perspective to help inform when we should start releasing more water to make room for these bigger storms that are coming in. But yeah, right now we've got a lot of room to put some more water.
That's great. And I'll say one thing that I think we've really improved on in the last several years is this, electronic newsletter with updates on Oroville for the community. And so just as we've done in past years, as we experience these big, wet storms coming off the Pacific, I think it'll be helpful just to provide updates through that newsletter on how that's impacting Oroville, particularly as, we start to get the levels up. I get your point right now, which is there's a ton of space in the reservoir, and we have a long way to go until we're really managing up at that flood level. But I just think it's helpful for everybody that lives up there and that tracks it, like people like me, so that they can turn around and tell people what the impact of the storm events are on Oroville, and make sure that we still have plenty of room.
Yeah, I completely agree, Secretary, and that's really glad that we have that newsletter going out and have that place that people can turn to for that kind of information.
Good. All right, we have a lot ahead of us in this meeting, but I want to make sure that anybody else that has questions for you as our state climatologist or Molly can ask them. All right, then let's move on. And as I mentioned, we're going to hear now from David Gordon, who's another colleague from the Department of Water Resources. He designs and leads emergency response exercises.
I apologize for interjecting. I think Molly actually has a couple slides before we move on to David.
Excellent. Over to you, Molly.
All righty. Thank you. And good morning, Secretary Crowfoot and commissioners. Thank you for having me today. I'm Molly White, and I'm the Assistant Division Manager here in the Division of Operations and Maintenance, and I oversee water management activities for the State Water Project. I'm going to provide an update just on our flood control operations from last year, looking where we stand today, current conditions, and planning activities ahead. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This is graphic represents the flood operations from last year. The red line is a required flood regulation storage, and it will vary just based upon wetness of the watershed. The dark blue line is the actual storage, and when the blue line crosses that red line, we are encroached in our flood pool. So as you can see on this graphic, much of the winter and early spring of last year, we were encroached into our flood control space. That is, we use that space to manage inflows coming into the reservoir that we can make controlled releases for into the Feather River. We did all of our release decisions during this period were in coordination with the Army Corps of Engineers. A couple other things I'd like to note on this graphic with the arrows there. The arrows are highlighting the enhanced flood pool, and it will be implemented this year. This is something we've been implementing for the past 5 years or so, and it will be implemented this year as well. And also, if you over to the right of the graphic, back looking back to that July 1st time period, see a sharp decline in storage. In a previous OCAC meeting, Mr. Sarkissian, our dam safety manager, did discuss the bathymetry update for Lake Oroville. And so that sharp decline is when we implemented that new data that was provided by that new data with the storage capacity was implemented on July 1st. So we have been coordinating. That went live for DWR on July 1st. We did coordinate with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and have adjusted our water control diagram to reflect that update in the storage capacity. And then lastly, the Army Corps of Engineers as well has incorporated this new data into their system on October 1st of this year. Next slide, please. And this is a snapshot of the curve from this year, starting this flood season. As we just had the discussion, that red line, we see that sharp decline in needed storage. And that was really, for the red line, that was a result of the November storms. And we do see in the blue that gain of storage. However, as shown, the actual storage is well below what is required at this time for flood control. So we were able to capture that storm flow and did not require any flood control actions. Next slide, please. So where we are today, this graphic, it's of current and historical data over the past 4 or 5 years of Oroville storage. It does not reflect the extent of the storage improvements that we did see from the AR activity in November. Currently, the storage stands at about 1.9 million acre feet, which is 108% of historical average. Last year at this time, we're about 400,000 acre feet higher and about 130% of average. As shown on the yellow line, it's a little bit difficult to see on this graphic, but it's on there. As presented earlier by Deputy Director Yarbrough, the lake has risen about nearly 30 feet from resulting from that storm event, and we gained about 300,000 acre feet. So very well received. This precip and inflow provided just a great boost, as discussed earlier, to storage and soil moisture coming off a very dry and warm start of the water year. And next slide, please. So I'll wrap it up. So as we look towards planning for 2025, we are early in the water year. Currently, as we stand today, average precip and snowpack in the Northern Sierras. We do have the wettest 3 months ahead of us, and how the water year shapes up, certainly heavily dependent upon these upcoming winter months as it relates to water supply. We continue to plan for extreme wet, dry conditions. Right now, we are at our minimum releases to the Feather River, which is 1,750 CFS, and are conserving storage. And lastly, we are implementing our enhanced flood pool. So with that, that concludes my overview.
That's super helpful. And just to break down some of the language, when you say enhanced flood pool, that's essentially more space in the reservoir than historically, just to enable more water to flow in big storm events?
Exactly. We incorporated that in the last 5 years, and it's above and beyond what is required from our current 1970 water control manual.
Super helpful. Thank you. Over to you, Bruce.
Bruce, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I've done this before, I promise. Would it be possible to go back to that first slide that you had? Because I had a question on that. When you had the two lines around the flood, is the top one the old flood capacity and the lower one the enhanced? Is that what we're looking at there?
Oh, I'm sorry. So the two dashed lines, the two black dashed lines, are the upper end and the lower end of the flood pool that's required the top black dash line is the top of the current water control manual. And then that upper line, that solid line for the enhanced flood pool, that's the bottom of the current water control manual. As we see that area of the dash line at the bottom divert from that solid line, that's the enhanced flood pool.
Okay.
I'd like to reach across and shade it out, but that enhanced flood pool, the two arrows are the top and the bottom, and the top of it is the U.S. Army Corps' current.
Okay. And I don't mean to monopolize, but the flood regulation storage means what? Because I was confused in the slide further on when you were kind of the more current conditions, because it seems like you're far out of flood regulation storage, but
we are, and that's a variable storage that's required by the Army Corps of Storage that we need to maintain so it's from the red line to the top of the red dash line is that available, that required storage that we need to maintain in the lake to manage high inflows.
Okay. I think I understand that. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bruce, it's a great question. So just basically to distill it, the big fat red line, as I understand it, Molly, is the amount of capacity that the current Army Corps manual requires. Is that fair?
Yes.
And then the lowest hatch line is this enhanced flood pool, which is essentially this improvement over the last 5 years in providing more capacity for water to come in during big storms than even the Army Corps manual requires?
Correct.
Got it. Okay. And then if you exceed that, then this is what you talked about of making releases, so that you're trying to bring the elevation of the lake down to enable that to ensure you have that capacity.
Absolutely. We use that available storage to manage the outflow to the river down below.
Helpful. Thank you. Supervisor Connolly.
I'd just like to say that thank you for adjusting to climate change. It's necessary. The original manual was written on data that was 50 years old when it was written, and by now it's 100 years out. So thank you.
Thanks, Supervisor. Any other questions for Molly? All right, then let's move on. And as I said, we're going to hear from David Gordon on what happened over the summer on these emergency response exercises, both tabletop and functional exercises. And then for those first responders and other agencies that participated, interested in your perspective of how it went or anything that you want to add. So over to you, David.
All right. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, and good morning, Commissioners. My name is David Gordon. I'm a principal engineer here in the State Water Project Executive Office. And, it's a pleasure working with many of you on trying to organize this Oroville Dam Citizens Advisory Commission meetings, as well as the ad hoc technical meetings that we've had with several of the commissioners and community members that are in attendance today. I am also involved in, as a member of the State Water Project Emergency Preparedness Program. And so I am going to give an overview of the program, but also go over into the details of these emergency exercises that we simulated to enhance our ability to respond to, being into our state of readiness that we always want to be in. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Emergency Preparedness Program was established in 2020, and this really came about over a number of incidences that we were experiencing in the State Water Project, as well as from external incidences that we really wanted to enhance our capabilities in responding as a cohesive and unified State Water Project, as well as enhance our partnerships with our external entities through these. I want to really highlight the vision of our program here, and that is to building a resilient state water project through a culture of preparedness that supports and maintains a state of readiness. The vision here really highlights our culture that is really committed to continuous improvement. And so, the exercises that I'm going to go over here really do highlight the fact that we are continuously looking to improve how we operate. And so one of the key functions of the program is to lead the development of these training on emergency management exercises. So that's why I am highlighting the Emergency Preparedness Program. Next slide, please. Okay, so although the name of the program is Emergency Preparedness, the program is really committed to enhancing all phases of this continuous cycle of emergency management. So this includes not only just the preparedness, but how are we responding, how are we recovering from an incident, as well as then what type of actions do we need to kind of make sure that we have for mitigation so we are more prepared for the future. Next slide, please. All right, so the left side of this slide really goes over various levels of exercises and trainings. So, every year, so one item here on the very top is the seminar. The seminar is actually something that we go over every year with our emergency management partners, as well as internal staff, to make sure that they are well rehearsed in the emergency action plans that we have for Oroville, and they're familiar with all of our facilities. The the activities that we went over in August was a tabletop exercise and functional exercise. The tabletop exercise was an internal meeting to really kind of test our internal staff on how we respond to a simulated emergency and walking through this and really testing out the roles and responsibilities internally on this aspect. The functional exercise that occurred on that we did on August 28th provided us an opportunity for not only our internal staff but our external agencies to perform a more robust simulated event to kind of test out the roles and responsibilities of not only our incident command, but our emergency operations center, our department operations center, as well as a unified command with the external organizations. And so that was, some of the pictures here are shown of our meeting with external parties and discussing through these scenarios. Next slide, please. So the benefits of an exercise like these is to really test our internal readiness. It is also an opportunity for us to kind of really understand that emergencies involve many agencies, and it's really important for us to practice these exercises with them, not only for them to just go through training with us, but it's also to build those relationships and understand those roles and responsibilities, because DWR is only responsible for a fraction of an emergency at a time. And so an example of this is that during an evacuation simulation, DWR needs to be coordinating with other agencies that would be managing something like that. Next slide, please. All right, Secretary Crowfoot talked about, how, there was many folks here that were involved in the emergency functional exercise. So there was overall 129 attendees from state, local agencies that were helping out in that representation in this exercise. And so highlighted in blue are the ones that are OCAC members did have participation. And I also want to highlight, the fact that there's various levels within DWR. So it is not only just State Water Project, it is involving the whole department that was participating in the exercise. Next slide, please. So a couple of the key takeaways is really want to continue to train internally, as well as the inclusion of external parties. I mentioned that these incidences really do involve multiple organizations in responding, and it's really important for us to develop those relationships, really understand what those roles and responsibilities are, really understand what are the key facilities that they need to be understanding, that are within their authorities, as well as what are their priorities. So we really want to enhance that, as well as kind of really increase the frequency of these types of tabletops, as well as functional exercises, and really kind of put that into motion here moving forward. Next slide, please. So with that, I will open the floor to questions and comments.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it. I want to call on Lieutenant Beller.
Yeah, I will say I thought that tabletop was very effective. I thought it was put together well. I was in a different room. They split the rooms, but the sergeant that works for me in emergency management was over in the where everything was happening. He had a lot of good things to say about the communication and the way it worked. And I think, ultimately that tabletop kind of helped us when we were planning for the potential flood events that we were going to experience related to the Park Fire burn scar. It kind of helped us with our planning and all that. So I thought it was a great training. I think we should definitely continue to do those.
It's really good to hear. And I would just say, open invitation, certainly from Department of Water Resources and state government, if they're, if you think we should be doing it more often or different scenarios or other people coming to the table. I know David and team really, are eager for whatever feedback. And David, I imagine you collected input already, but Lieutenant, it's just great to hear that. Other people who participated or those with questions for David? All right, David. Hey, thanks so much for the presentation, but more importantly, all the work over the summer. And really important that both the tabletops and the actually getting out in the functional exercises in the field continue. And do keep these updates coming, both at the commission and in those electronic newsletters, because they're really important. All right, next up, we're going to hear from Jennifer Fromm, as we talked about, from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And it was last December when I think it was Jennifer that briefed our commission on the flood control, the water control manual update. And so we're actually making an Army Corps update, an annual presentation. So we had it last December and now we're having it this December. And I know, Jennifer, I think you're going to review the water control manual process. So we all kind of jog our memories in terms of how this works, and then talk about where the process stands and then opportunities for upcoming engagement. So welcome.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So my name is Jenny Fromm. I'm the chief of the water management section for the Sacramento district for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Next slide. So today I'm going to talk about the water control manual overview. What is a water control manual and what's the process look like? Briefly touch on the FURO pilot study that's being done at the Center of Western Weather and Water Extremes. Then talk about a simplified water control manual update process, and then the next steps, and then there's time for questions. Next slide, please. So first, let's talk about what is a water control manual and what is the process to get it updated. So next slide, please. So basic objectives for water control management is we're operating to the authorized purposes and laws, maintaining the structural and operational integrity of the facilities, and avoid risks to public health, safety, life, and property. And the Corps is responsible for water control management at all Corps-owned facilities, but the Corps is also responsible for prescribing flood control and navigation regulations for projects, non-Corps projects. And we call those Section 7 projects based on Section 7 of the Flood Control Act of 1944. And that includes, dams owned and operated by other agencies, including the Department of Water Resources, who owns DWR, and Yuba Water Agency, who owns New Bullards Bar, special acts of Congress, FERC conditions, and other agreements. Next slide. So let's also go through what some water control manual terminology is. There's a bunch of acronyms being thrown around, and sometimes they all start with water control, and it can get a little muddy sometimes. So a water control manual just includes the description and history of the project, and it also contains information about the watershed, specific things that are going on in that watershed, potentially if there are fires happening, that information's in there as well. And it also contains the water control plan, which includes the operations plan. Now, one thing to note about the water control manual itself is it only takes into account the flood control operations. The only thing about the water supply operations that will be located in there is where is that boundary and if there is a minimum flow requirement. And so that water control plan, there's a graphical representation of that water control plan, which we call a water control diagram, but there's also a description of it as well. And then it shows you how much flood space you're going to need on any given day, the release requirements based on the time of year, and the state of the watershed. So it's basically telling you how to operate the reservoir for flood control. Next slide. So we update water control manuals, and there's two different kinds of updates to water control manuals. There's what we call an administrative update, which means we update the cover, the points of contact, any activity that's happened in that specific watershed, including fires, like I mentioned before. We update the hydrology data. And then we update anything to core standards. You know, recently a new policy came out where the template for the water control manuals has changed. So that would include updating to the new template. And then we also have what we call a comprehensive update. It includes all the things that are in an administrative update, but it also includes a revision to the water control plan. An administrative update does not include any revisions to the water control plan. The water control plan stays the same for the administrative, and it changes for the comprehensive. Next slide. So how does the water control manual get updated? And this is a very simplified way of looking at it. And it's traditionally 1 to 5 year process. It could be shorter, you know, and we don't want it to be longer. So we start with, next slide, these are a little bit animated, so I might be next sliding a bunch here. So we start with the project management plan, including the schedule, roles, and responsibilities. This will also include incorporating what we call the hydrologic engineering management plan, which basically tells us like what type of engineering analysis do we think we're going to have to do in order to get this water control plan updated. Next slide. And then throughout the process, we have public and stakeholder outreach, so everyone knows what's going on and there's an avenue for questions and feedback. Next slide. We also update the hydrology. So, you know, the last time the Oroville water control manual was updated was 1970. There's a lot of years of hydrology in between 1970 and today. So you update the hydrology to reflect the new period of record and then do some additional analysis to make sure everything's up to date on that aspect. Next slide. Incorporate the models so they reflect the existing conditions. This should be a pretty simple lift since your models are going to be based on existing conditions at the time, but there might be some additional things you need to add to make sure you got everything there, because there's additional items you need to be running when you're updating a water control manual than just regularly operating the reservoir. Next slide. You're going to identify potential alternatives, like what type of things do we want to be looking at when we're looking at what we want to change in the reservoir operations. So evaluating the reservoir itself, you know, and in this case, we're also having to look at New Bullard's Bar since there's a shared control point, and then also looking at, you know, what's happening downstream. Next slide. Part of the process to update the water control manual is also looking at how does these changes affect the environment. So we're looking at any effects, you know, examples would be recreation, erosion, fisheries, etc. So we're looking at all the effects that these potential change in operations could have. Next slide. And then we review everything that we've written. So you're updating the document itself, the water control manual itself, that water control diagram that I discussed, you're updating that. You have NEPA documents that you need to create and update those. And then the last the two items, ATR and IEPR, those basically represent specific types of review that need to happen in order for the document to be approved. And then you are actually creating the water control manual itself. Next slide. And then once all those things are done, it still needs to go through a policy review, a legal review, and then it gets approved by the division commander. So in this case, that would be South Pacific Division, and that would be Colonel Hondura currently, who is in that role right now. Next slide, please. So next, I'm going to briefly talk about the FURO pilot study. Next slide. So what is FURO? So Forecast Informed Reservoir Operations, and I'm going to read you the definition. A reservoir operations strategy that better informs decisions to retain or release water by integrating additional flexibility in operation policies and rules with enhanced monitoring and improved weather and hydrologic forecasts. So what does that mean? It means like looking at the forecast and seeing like, can you store additional water when it's dry? And then can you release that water prior to the event? And so using a FURO could tell you how big that space is that you're allowed to store extra during the dry periods. It could also tell you the magnitude of releases. There's many ways that this can be incorporated, but essentially it's looking at how can additional flexibility be incorporated into the operations with using forecasts. And the goal is really to improve the flood risk management and increase water conservation without having any direct impacts to public safety. Next slide. So currently there is a Yuba Feather FURO pilot program that's being conducted. It's through the Center for Western Weather and Water Extremes at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. And Yuba Water Agency, DWR, as well as the Corps of Engineers are involved in that process. It's not a core process, it's strictly a research process. And they're basically trying to figure out like, what are the bounds, like what is possible with the use of forecasts? And can the use of forecasts be codified officially in the water control manual? And one thing of note here, like since it's not a core process, it hasn't gone through any core reviews. We've been involved, but it's not gone through the official review process that the Corps has. And, you know, it's also a unique thing that we also have money at the same time to update the water control manual. So typically, I mean, granted, there are not many FURO pilot studies out there. There's only a handful, but this is the first time that the pilot study is occurring at the same time that we have money for the water control manual update. So there are some parallel efforts, but they are separate. And while the FURO pilot study might inform what goes into the water control manual, and it is soon to be completed, the final viability assessment is set to be published early next year. And while that part is done, it doesn't mean that the water control manual effort is done. So I want to just make that clear. Like there's many opportunities to be informed about what potential operations are going to look like with the water control manual. And we definitely want to hear what everyone has to say when it comes to what those operations look like. Next slide. So we kind of went through the process, but now I'm going to kind of break it down a little more simply. We're updating a water control manual. Next slide. So this is kind of looking at things from an environmental perspective, because we do have to look at the impacts of the new operation. So I have a list of 10 things here. And then on the right-hand side, there's also showing some progress. So the green check mark means completed, the yellow clock means in progress, and the black circle means it hasn't been started yet. And there's also a "you are here" sign in between 4 and 5. So number one is looking at environmental compliant management plan. So really this is us looking at, we think we need to think about these particular items in order to be compliant with NEPA. So we have finished that. Then number two is the environmental modeling plan. This is where we said we think we need to use these models in order to truly assess the impacts that this new operation may have. And then number three is developing the baseline / no action and future without project baseline conditions. We did that because that's how we're operating now. And then we've done some initial modeling to support the environmental analysis and alternative screenings, just to kind of get us started to see, like, does this make sense? What questions do we still have? So we're in progress of that right now. Next steps are going to be NEPA scoping and initial stakeholder coordination. And I'll talk more about that here in a second. Draft water control manual document, draft NEPA document, public draft review, final NEPA document, and water control manual update. And then the final step is the Corps approval and record of decision. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk about next steps. Next slide. So here's where we're thinking we're going. We are currently planning out starting the public scoping period in the spring of 2025. We're starting to figure out like what that looks like. We want to hear what everyone's questions are, what your concerns are, where are your questions, where are your concerns, if it's about a specific location in the watershed, is it upstream, is it downstream, is it in the reservoir itself? So we're planning that out right now. We think that'll be in spring 2025, and you will be fully notified on when that happens. We'll be following the ER about how to communicate when those meetings occur. Then the next step, and while it will be the draft water control manual update and the draft NEPA document. So approximately 6 months later, we'll have a draft NEPA document and a draft water control manual. And those will be ready for public review between the period of public scoping bullet and the draft documents. There will be additional meetings. So that way you'll know what's going on and you'll see what's happening in this aspect. We think that'll be around the December timeframe of 2025. And then the public review period will be determined by what type of NEPA analysis it is. If it's an environmental assessment, that's what EA means. It's 30 days. If it's an environmental impact statement, it's 45 days. That's what EIS means. And then depending on what type of NEPA analysis it is, that will determine the final NEPA document. So those are the next steps. And that is all I have. I'm here for questions today. Here's also a QR code if you have questions. And then at the bottom, there is a specific website, email address that will go to me and a couple of other colleagues. So that way, if you have questions, go there. You can also go through our PAO office because I know that that is direction I've given before. So 3 ways to get in touch with us. And with that, that's all I have. And I'm available for questions. Over.
Thanks. You have broken down a pretty complicated process in a really clear way. And I want to call on Supervisor Connolly in a moment, but just highlight again for us the opportunities for sort of public engagement in this coming year.
Yes. So the first opportunity will be with that public scoping period. We'll have the initial kickoff meeting. We did have an informational meeting in October where we invited everyone and basically walked through the same steps. Like, here's how you update a water control manual. Here's what the next steps are. So that will be the initial start of the public comment period, but then there will be additional meetings along the way that are not shown on this graphic.
That's helpful. And I think for our team, particularly as it relates to the electronic newsletter that we're putting out on Oroville happenings, it'll be helpful to just flag these opportunities to engage both in the scoping and then later. Over to you, Supervisor Connolly.
Did I hear you right that this is a living document even after it's issued and it can be changed, or did I hear that wrong?
There are certain aspects like contact lists that can be updated. The operations would not be living. A new manual would have to be issued if the operations would change.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
Well,
oh, I think
nobody else wants to talk. I guess we have to get it right because we can't mess with it. There you go. I'll flip my hand.
Secretary, you're on mute.
Secretary, you're on mute currently.
Sorry about that. Yeah, to Supervisor Connolly's point, if it can be modified into the future, but it's obviously a long multi-year process, right? So Jenny, these are meant to be pretty durable.
They're meant to be pretty durable. The great news is Congress seems pretty pumped about sending money for water control manual updates. So if we see something in the future where it's like, hey, there's an opportunity to update the manual again, we can ask to get back in the queue to update it, and hopefully we're not going to capture everything, but hopefully with the incorporation of FURO, that flexibility will be enough that it's serving purposes where we won't have to update it on a regular basis. We're supposed to be looking at things every 10 years to update them, but we're also limited with the funding we get in order to do that. But like I said, Congress seems pretty excited about giving money for water control manual updates. So at this moment, I'm not Congress, but I don't see an issue with if we see an update that needs to happen in the future, we can get back in the queue.
Really helpful. Bruce.
So this might be a difficult question to ask, but or to answer, but based on experiences with other updates on major facilities, and Oroville's a big one, what's kind of the range of parameters that is reasonable to think about of the changes that might be expected in terms of operations?
That's a big question because there's a lot of opportunity there. Well, first of all, the authorizations for the flood space are not changing. So that 750,000 acre feet of flood space that Oroville has, that's not changing. It's just how we're using that space could potentially change. There's a concept of a quote unquote FURO space where when I mentioned you could be allowed to store water in the flood space when it's dry, that could be sized differently. And then you potentially could pre-release prior to the event coming and get down to what the assumed top of conservation or the amount of flood space needed on that day would get to. So it's a big question, and that was a small answer, but like if you have details on like specific things you're asking, like we can get more into it. And somehow my camera turned off. I'm not really sure why. Let me stop it and try it again.
You are not, in fact, an empty chair. We know.
Okay. I don't know what's going on. I'm still here.
But the FIRO would be a key thing to keep an eye on.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Jenny, then probably in the scoping discussion that's going to take place in the spring, there'll be you could talk more about, you know, sort of the scope of the changes, right? I mean, isn't that the whole notion of the scoping exercise?
Right. The initial part will just be like gathering information from the public and the stakeholders. And then like once we have that information, then we can start, you know, communicating like, hey, this is what we're thinking would be a good operation. What do you think? What are your questions? What are your concerns, etc. It will be based on like potentially what's in the FIRO final viability assessment, but then also like some additional analysis that we're doing on a water control manual side as well, and public input.
That's super helpful. Supervisor Kimmelshoe.
Yeah, Jenny, this may be a real stupid question, but what do you see as the biggest changes from previous manuals? I mean, are you looking at things like climate change and how that might affect how the new updates are done? Is there any one or two things that you see that are major changes? Does that make sense?
Yes. So I'm not a climate scientist, so I will start off the conversation with that. And we will be looking at climate change through like climate change. The best way that someone described it to me, and again, I'm not a climate scientist, was like, we're going to put on our climate change glasses and view the alternatives through it that way. So we will be looking at that to see how climate change might affect. I'm just got a note. I don't know. Sorry. I think the computer's excited that maybe my camera started working again. I'm not sure.
Can't see you, but we can hear you just fine. So know that.
Okay, perfect. So we will be looking at climate change and the core. We're working with our community of practice for climate change to figure out what that looks like for water control manuals. Other things that you asked about biggest challenges is just, you know, how to incorporate forecast informed reservoir operations. You know, it's a new thing for the Corps. We have the Lake Mendocino, which is in San Francisco district. That new water control manual should be published soon. And I don't know when soon is, but it should be in 2025. That'll be the first one that has a FIRO pilot study before the water control manual update. So just like what is, you know, it look like at Oroville and New Bullards Bar with the FIRO. So it's a new thing for the Corps, but we're figuring it out and we're really excited about it. Over.
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that those of us up here in the north are, we understand that the reservoirs are there to supply water to other parts of the state. But what we're most concerned about here is flood control, obviously. And so just a note to that. I know Supervisor Connolly has beat that drum for many years. So we are very, very, very appreciative of what you're doing, and there needs to be an emphasis on flood control. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
And just to reiterate too, the water control manual only contains flood control operations. So, and our public safety is our top priority. Over.
And that's the controlling operational guidelines for the dam and the reservoir. But Supervisor Kimmelshoe, I'm glad that we got to continue to just, you know, emphasize the importance of that. I guess the other thing too is, you know, we talk about climate change as shorthand, and some people in the state are more comfortable talking about climate change than others. I also talk about it as, you know, the extreme weather is getting more extreme. So I presume that, Jenny, what you're talking about when you put the climate glasses on is really looking at what the science is suggesting in terms of how intense these winter storms are going to get, and then also these dry periods. Is that sort of is the kind of takeaway in terms of what the climate glasses mean?
Yes.
Got it. That's helpful. and your update's really helpful. And I love how you can just break this down into ways that lay people like me can understand. You don't have to be an expert in the Army Corps process to actually understand it. So huge thanks there. We want to get to Commissioner Bateman and Mr. Mentek's presentation as well, but want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to ask any other questions of Jenny. Jenny, you made really clear that there's a bunch of different ways to get in contact with you, and you welcome any offline discussion as well.
Yes.
All right. So then let's move on. So as I mentioned, we recognize that several commissioners and community members have been actively tracking this water control manual update process and engaging with the Corps. And so I want to invite Commissioner Bateman and, as I said, Mr. Mentek, who have worked with a set of leaders and identified priorities for the manual that they've shared with the Corps and DWR. We thought it was a great opportunity here to hear this this list of priorities as well. And then I'll reference that John at the top of the discussion from who helps to lead Department of Water Resources identified those 4 top priorities for the manual revisions from the Department of Water Resources perspective. So let me turn it over to you, Commissioner Bateman.
Okay, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Good. I came to Oroville 35 years ago to start a manufacturing company that operates 24/7. And we were shut down for at least a week in 1997 and again in 2017. And we really couldn't understand the background to that. And so together with a bunch of other business people from Oroville, we started the Feather River Recovery Alliance. And since then we submitted a petition to FERC to hold the DWR accountable, which was signed by 6,500 people. And we've collected together a bunch of allies and associates, including Matt, who's been with us since the start, more or less. And Butte County, of course, and Supervisor Connolly has been extremely helpful. And he and his predecessor have worked on this continuously for the last 25 years, I think. And the Oroville City and other Oroville associations have been involved. And we got UC Berkeley, the Center for Catastrophic Risk Management also, and local representatives have come to help us and advise us. It's fairly natural that we would get involved with the water control manual because it's critical to the safety of downstream safety. And we submitted the questions to the Corps last November, which we got our answers in February, and we submitted another follow-up questions in August, and we got actually answers this week, which we're still trying to digest. And we participated also in a series of side meetings of this commission with the DWR relating to public safety. This week, one specifically on the water control manual. We appreciate the frankness with which the DWR has dealt with us. I'd just like to make a couple of points. First, before Matt takes over, we've been digging into the background of the Oroville levy, which was christened by the chairman an orphan levy at least 2 years ago, and it still remains an orphan as far as we can make out. We know that it has boils. They are observed in 86 and 97, when releases from the dam exceed something like 100,000 cubic feet per second, and they've not been closely investigated or fixed. The levee was created by dredgings from the river in the early 1900s, and its condition has not recently been properly evaluated as far as we can tell. And we are wondering whether it's reasonable to ask whether it should be used as the main channel for releasing water from the dam without evaluation. Sorry. So that's Bill's dog. and whether it really is sensible for a water control manual to be issued revised without getting some sort of evaluation of the Oroville levy. Secondly, if the water control manual revisions result in increased storage of water with improved safety, as we hope they will, is it unreasonable to expect the benefits to be split between the state water contractors who get the water free or low cost, the extra water, and increasing budgets for the safety at the dam? And there are several projects that aren't being progressed as quickly as they might be. One is improving the gates, the second is installing piezometers, and the third is fixing the emergency spillway. And so if there are some benefits, we think they should be split between increasing safety and increasing the water. We need as much support as we can get from the community and other interested agencies. And if anyone was interested in joining us, please let me know. And we're happy to participate in anyone else's effort just as well. So that's over to you, Matt.
And Tara, I just want to make sure that Matt is here as a presenter. Oh, he looks like he's connecting his audio.
Am I on?
We heard you faintly, Matt. Can you speak again?
Is that better?
Yeah, a little faint. I don't know if you can turn up your volume or get closer to the computer.
I think we're hearing you through Commissioner Bateman's speakers, so maybe you want to get close to him.
Or maybe even switch and get in front of his computer.
Yeah.
Matt, you come on this.
Oh, and it looks like you successfully
Matt?
attached your own audio, Matt.
So am I good now? Am I good?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, thanks.
I would just project.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Matt Mentink, Oroville Comprehensive Needs Assessment ad hoc member, which was a 3-year process to look at 6 different tasks at Oroville in partnership with FERC to help with the relicensing of the next 50 years, what infrastructure needs.
Oh.
Yeah, he was coming from Commissioner's microphone still, so.
Yeah. Matt, can you try to unmute yourself on your own computer?
How's that?
Beautiful.
Thank you for the help.
Yeah.
First time I've presented.
And then I think Commissioner Bateman, if you can mute your computer, then we'll lose the echo and then we'll hear from Matt.
I know. I just muted.
Your speakers, Commissioner, if you can mute your speakers, you're getting feedback from your speakers into Matt's microphone now.
Lower your volume.
How do I do it? Yeah, turn your volume to 0.
Oh, okay, same thing.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's James said it's actually the speakers. So if it's a way to like turn off your speakers or your not only your microphone but your speakers.
Let's check you out now, Matt. How do you sound?
Check.
It's better, but we're getting a little echo still. But if you speak up, I think we'll be okay, Matt.
Give me a second.
Just shut his computer off. This isn't too important. Just shut his computer.
Yeah. Okay, that might have done it. Am I good?
Yeah, it sounds much better. Thank you very much.
Okay. So that comprehensive needs assessment, like I said, looked at 5 tasks: spillway capacity to pass the probable maximum flood, a FERC requirement, whereas Army Corps Engineers manual is to pass the
standard project flood, which is 200 to 500 year flood. I think for Oroville, it's peak flows of 440 with 3-day events or so at 770,000 cubic acre feet. Task 2 was this, what we're talking about, a FIRO operation improvement. Task 3 was the floodgate reliability. 4 was the evaluation of a low water outlet. And I think that one was on 7 of the 10 suggested plans coming out of that. There was definitely a need for that. And as we go through this report, we may discover why we need that low level outlet. 5th was dam embankment reliability. And then 6th, the instrumentation, monitoring, and piezometers. Having gone through that process, I think that it was good to view the whole dam management holistically, where all these 5 tasks are sort of interdependent on each other. And but with that said, I'll start this presentation on the preliminary viability report that gets into 450 pages of leading engineers talking to other engineers on what we might expect in the next manual. So, oh, I'm sorry, next slide. Whoops. Next slide.
Yeah, James, if you want to just click forward until you get to the one that has the forecast reservoir, informed reservoir operations manual.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this is that 450 page report, which is only the preliminary viability assessment report that is very heavy in engineer graphs and studies and language, very hard to dissect. And I don't expect many people to do that. So today I'm going to try and give you sort of the Reader's Digest version of that and try and loop in some downstream concerns in the process. Next. Now, the history of this area is that since 1950, we've had 5 major floods, resulted in 41 deaths, significant property damage, and devastating social and economic problems to the downstream communities. And the primary objective is going to be to reduce the flood risk, achieve incidental water supplies where possible. And I want to highlight the word incidental water supplies because everybody has confirmed that the #1 goal is flood safety. Next. Back up. Hold that slide for a second for me. Back up. You can. Yeah. Now, if you look, you see Oroville in the top, Bullard's Bar in the left, but down or to the right, Bullard's Bar, if you look, has the Middle Fork and the South Fork. Over half the watershed up there, say from Donner Summit to Jackson's Meadow Reservoir across the crest of the Sierras, is uncontrolled. Not only are the rains that are in that area, but the snowmelt that comes down with those. And there was supposed to be a dam built below there that catches that, and so that we could then have 260,000 acre feet of additional flood space. That was voted down by the public, never built, funds went elsewhere. So now we are 260,000 acre feet of flood storage short of what the grand design was supposed to be back in the 60s. Another thing that didn't happen in the 60s when the water control, when the state water contract was being put together was an additional source of water besides Oroville. There was supposed to have been, I don't know, 150,000 or better acre feet coming from a North Coast river. And when that one got voted down, then all the state water contractors downstream have not been getting the water that they originally signed up for. I think they signed up to get 4.2 and they're currently only getting 2.4. So you can see where from their end, they're really looking to increase water supply. And then from our end, without Marysville, we're really trying to increase flood safety. And so it's lacking two different facilities that has sort of put us competing here. Next. I think this is a great picture to show what early releases can do. This was put together by Yuba County Water. They were studying a secondary spillway, which looks like it's a go. All the studies are going. And if they could do a 3-day event, they could get 87,000 acre feet out and drop the water level on the levee system by 2.5 feet, which may not seem like a lot, but what that does is it keeps a dry lid on the levees so that it doesn't get saturated. And then as the levees quickly drop, you get that slouching erosion because that water is no longer there to hold that saturated. This will give us a 2-3 foot lid or something to kind of help hold some of that levee in place there. So yep. Reading the sheets there. So besides the basic safety criteria under the 1970 Water Control Manual of avoiding the use of the emergency spillway, reducing flood flow frequencies, maintaining within levee constraints, there's other performance metrics that could be evaluated to sort of reach that functional equivalent of that 260,000 acre feet at Marysville Reservoir. And we could look at the levee vulnerability to flow duration and saturation, maybe establish a cursory down ramping rate so that we don't run the water up and hold it there for 5 days, drop it real fast, making it susceptible to river slouching. That's one of the requirements that was written into the water control manual, is that you consider levee erosion in the process. Another thing that could be done as a cursory benefit is how do you prevent the yo-yoing effect, the up and down of flows and the wear and tear on the levees, the length of evacuations. So hopefully the final viability report speaks to improved safety more than the preliminary report did. Next slide. This is a picture of the 1970 flood control manual, and this is the wetness index. It considered how dry the soil was in the watershed that may act as a sponge so that it would soak up the first third of a big storm. So maybe you could drop your reservoir a third because the soil was going to catch part of it for you. And it was a way to increase the spring refill and summer water storage by having this flexible flood space based upon just the wetness of the soil. So many days without rain, then they could drop it, maybe was it 1.5% every day without rain. So it inches its way down in between storms. But what this failed to do was consider the snowpack that sits on top of that wet soil, especially at lower elevations, say 5,500 feet, Bucks Lake or lower. That's surely going to melt with the next storm. It did not fluctuate the flood pool for the snow melt that's going to come with it. And that's one of the concerns of the downstream citizens is that none of the proposals being proposed out there are looking at using historic flood pool or historic flood pack and the water equivalency of that to fluctuate their flood pool. They're going to hold it right at a given level and then, figure it out when the storm comes, big or small. Also, we can use this graph to look and maybe start explaining at what the different alternative plans are that are being proposed in this FIRO report. There's 4 of them. One is baseline, which is basically the 1970 manual. There's another one called EFO, and that stands for Assemble, a series of hydrographs, reservoir simulations that said what the probability of exceedance might be. And it was developed, I don't know, 5 years ago or so between DWR and HDR, one of their consultants during the CNN process. And what their proposal was is, how about if we start the reservoir or the flood pool 75% full? We'll start with only 25% of your 750,000 acre feet that the Army Corps of Engineers bought when the dam was built. They paid for 20% of the construction, and in turn, they've got the 750,000 acre feet of flood storage. So alternative 1 says, how about if we take back 75% of that flood storage and only start you at 25%? And according to the preliminary viability report, this was a way to better maximize spring refill and summer delivery. It also looks at ensemble forecast and then creates a curve, sort of a mean average. And that mean average would then be guiding their releases. And their releases would be based on, well, if I'm looking at a 25-year storm, then I'm going to start releasing 50 feet or this 50,000 acres feet. Or if I'm looking at this storm, I'm going to, try and get myself down to 750 acre feet and make the early releases to evacuate that flood space that they borrowed. It's called a descriptive report, and it's based upon hard rules. Alternative 3 is what the FIRO independent team came up with that they call hybrid. And hybrid said, so let's find something between the two. Let's not take all of that flood storage. Let's start it at 65%. 62. Thank you. And then what we'll do is when we run all of those reservoir simulations models, if any of them exceed the tolerance, we'll kick that out, make some adjustments, and run them again. So that way it counts for forecast errors or forecast uncertainties. And more importantly is, it actually makes it a requirement that the flood pool can drop not only to the 750,000 acre feet that Army bought, but it could dip into about 300,000 acre feet, 275 or so, of the conservation pool, the water storage, only when needed to evacuate ahead of large events like the 1997 event or ones of the future. We temporarily get to drop into your conservation space, and in return, we allow you to creep into ours and help improve your spring safety. It's a collaborative effort that hasn't been done in the past. In the past, we'd have to wait until we encroach the flood pool before we could release. We couldn't dip into the conservation. So that's the 3 options that are on the table right now. Stay with the baseline, go with the one of DWR and HDR's, starting with only 25% of the pool, and then the hybrid that starts much further down and allows us to dip into the conservation pool only when needed. Next slide. So Brian Ham, Marty Ralph, and others working through the Center for Western Weather and Extremes went back and looked at the snowmelt during the 2017 Oroville Dam incident. And the analysis showed that of the distributed snow water equivalency indicated that snowmelt increased water available for runoff watershed wide by 37%. And if you look at that, the snowmelt contribution could also have the same effect on fire operations as taking a event like a 86 event and scaling it by 35%, because that's the contribution that snowmelt could have on an operations if you're don't have accurate snow readings and aren't accounting for that. As of now, none of the alternative plans plan to adjust the size of the flood pool for, say, a 30% increase in runoff from a historical snowpack ahead of the storms. Now, the final viability report may change that, and the Army Corps of Engineers has indicated that that's something that they are considering. So we'll wait and see when the new report comes out. Next. This one, I got to apologize, maybe a little misleading. If you read the table over there, it says that forecast air rate percent on a 1 to 3 day, it was a 23% underestimated to a 16% overestimated. For a 4 to 6 day, it was 50% underestimated to 50% overestimated. And on a 7 to 9 day, it could be as much as 60% underestimated or 12%. But for the most part, these underestimations was that there was more observed inflows coming into the reservoir than what was forecasted. These numbers were created as a baseline of past conditions. So these air rates was from the 97 New Year's flood. And they're going to use those as a benchmark in order to measure the improvement in forecasting skills going forward. But that's the work that the forecast team has ahead of them, is to get those high percents of underestimations down so that when we run the fire models that we're not surprised. Next. I like this graph a lot here, and I wish we could analyze it a little bit more. This was taken the 86 flood and scaling it by 110%. So we've added another 10% to that. They scaled a lot of reports to help them plan for climate change. I think they did a good job in this. And they're scaling them clear up to not just the what they think is the standard project flood, but the probable maximum flood. So they run these different scaled reports through the reservoir simulation models. And the top one that we're looking at, you'll see 4 different colors there. The blue is the 1970 baseline plan. The orange is the hybrid plan that you can see starts at with 62% of the flood pool. The green, and there is a fuchsia one, which is called a perfect forecast. Those two are sort of running parallel with each other, except the perfect knows the answer to the forecast in advance. So it can say, in a perfect world with a perfect forecast, that's what my graph is going to look like. And personally, I think it was designed on a way to promote the the other one. But that's the four colors. The top graph is the storage at Oroville Lake. You can see in the middle of the graph, they start evacuating and then the storm comes in and it runs back up again. And then they level it off back to where the starting ones were. The second graph down has a dotted line going across it. And those are your constraints. This one is the release constraints at Oroville, where they're only supposed to release 150,000. And then you can see the different colors. Some don't even get close to it, or excuse me, a couple don't get close to it, but the hybrid one does. It could stay down at 100 releases. Just like the graph we saw, that pre-releases could allow you to not top the levee each time. And those two that topped the levee were the one with only 25% storage and the perfect forecast. I want you to also look that 150 releases of those two, and then you come down to the next graph below, which says flows at Yuba City stayed at 150, which tells me that this model did not account for the 30,000 acre feet that could be coming into Hongkut. So as you look at the results of this, think of that there's going to be at least 30,000 or 30,000 acre feet from Hongkut during these big storms that this graph is not picking up as it overtops or exceeds its exceedance points.
Hey, Mr. Mentek, I want to give you just a quick time check. I want to ensure that we have enough time for public comment at the end of the meeting, and then one other piece. So just would ask you maybe to wrap it up here in the next 2 or 3 minutes.
Next slide. This is a quick study that was done by Yuba County Water, and it showed that with the preferred alternative in their new spillway, that a unit of measure on safety called the expected annual damage, EAD, could drop from 35 million to 22 million annually. So it's basically a way of looking at cost benefit safety wise as 13 million a year. Next. This graph is within the preliminary viability report, and it's trying to show additional water that's captured by running these new alternatives. It's saying that the hybrid report could capture another 200,000 acre feet annually. And the other one is 10% better, but it comes with much greater risk. I'm estimating the value of an acre foot at $1,000. I know Yuba County Water sells some water down south at $800 an acre foot, and that doesn't even include, you know, the hydroelectric generation revenues that comes from it. So at an annual gain at 1,000 an acre foot could be 200 million annual benefit a year, or $1 billion every 5 years. Next. So I was glad to see this. A lot of the concerns that I had reading through this report was inconsistencies in comparative data, lacking data, and these recommendations were given so that when the next fire report comes out, that they put additional vigor into these reports. Next. And this last slide was pulled to demonstrate the third alternative, the hybrid. Not only does the hybrid kick out any scenario if there's any exceedance of tolerance and run a new set of simulations, but they can put in these risk tolerance as little on and off boxes they can turn on and turn off. And hopefully within that, they could also create some other ones in the futures to match infrastructure conditions, climate change, etc. So this is another advantage that the hybrid alternative approach has over some of the others. I thank everybody for bearing with me. It was a long process trying to summarize a lot of the information that hasn't been shared so far. And look forward to the final report coming out and repeating the same exercise. I'll take any questions if there are any.
So much, Mr. Mintek, and appreciate all that the Alliance has done to try to distill what is a lot of information and a lot of complex information. And I'm glad that Jenny from the Army Corps identified the opportunities to go deeper with the Army Corps on the flood, I should say the water manual control update. So hoping and looking forward to the Alliance participating in that that engagement, including the scoping session coming up in March. I want to note that Assemblymember Gallagher is here, and I always give the Assemblymember credit for bringing us together in the first place by leading the passage of the legislation that formed this committee. So at least I think that I saw the assembly member. But in any event, are there questions for Commissioner Bateman or Mr. Mintek?
I'm sorry. Could I make one comment?
Please do.
That if, as far as we've discovered, the two critical areas are the treatment of snowmelt and the levee preparedness, and those areas where I think that if we're going to have future floods and need attention to avoid future floods, there's need attention. But anyhow, Matt has put up a tremendous amount of work into this, and I think we're getting near the bottom of things. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the work and for the suggestion that we hear this presentation at our meeting today. In just a moment, I want to open this up to public comment, which is an important part of the commission meeting. But before I do, I just want to say once again that all of the comments or suggestions that get made in this commission meeting and other commission meetings are being included in our action item tracker, which is our way to keep ourselves accountable for following up between meetings. And that's available on the commission website. There's several potential topics for our next meeting, including more of a sort of a 101 on the water control manual, so that we continue to understand how that impacts the operation of the reservoir and dam and what we can do to inform that update. A potential topic could be a report on the Forecast Informed Reservoir Operation Effort, or FIRO. An update on the California Nevada River Forecast Center's inflow forecasting for California. Or we could also talk about state investments in snow runoff forecasting, which has been a big priority. In the coming weeks, we'll share a proposed agenda and then ask commissioners for any input on the agenda, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure these meetings are relevant and helpful to everybody that's joining. Before I move to public comment, are there any additional topics that folks want to throw out for our next meeting this spring for the group to consider?
Secretary James Gallagher here. So yeah, I did get on a little bit later, but wanted to just thank everybody again just for this group and the input. I think Matt, I was catching more the latter half of his report, but I think that's a lot of great information for us to be considering. So thank you for giving that time, Secretary Crowfoot, and also I think a lot of good things that we can kind of continue to discuss. I think Mr. Bateman brought up two of them, but more things that I think we can continue to discuss on how we improve overall operations at Oroville. So again, my apologies for being late to get on the meeting today, but appreciate all the good work that's going on.
Yeah, and thank you for the partnership. And your team joined right at the beginning, so they've been tracking everything. And I mentioned that, believe it or not, we've had 18 commission meetings, which is remarkable. And we're coming up next year on the second triennial report to the legislature. So just know that we're going to be working with this commission, and then certainly your office and Senator Megan Daly's office to complete a report by the end of next year for the legislature, just on what we've been doing as it relates to the safety of the dam, but then also this commission. All right, let's move to public comment, and I turn to Tara on introducing that item.
Absolutely. Thank you, Secretary. If we do have any members of the public who would like to make a comment, you can click the raise hand button, and then I'll call on you in the order you raised your hand. You can also provide written comments in the Q&A. I don't think we've gotten any yet, but I will read those out and then we can have folks answer if that's appropriate. So do we have any folks who would like to make a public comment? We'd like to keep each of those to less than 3 minutes in order to allow as many people as possible to provide their perspectives. So I see a hand from someone identified as Zoom user. James, can you unmute them so they can speak?
Yeah, for the user that hasn't renamed themselves, please, when you unmute yourself, state your name and make your comment. Give me a second here, and you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yeah, there's a lot of echo though. So if you're in the same room with somebody else that there's a speaker with.
We've got about 3 computers around here, all broadcasting audio.
Yeah, so that's not going to work. Somebody's got to have to mute their speakers or move out of the room.
You know, I'll mute mine, and I'll talk through Commissioner Bateman. Hi.
So you can't have 2 mics going at the same time either. So I'll go ahead and mute your other computer, and you can speak through Commissioner Bateman's computer. Please state your name and make your comment. Thank you.
Apologies. Commissioner Bateman, you're going to need to turn on your
You need to,
yourself.
yeah, Commissioner Bateman, you need to unmute the computer that he's speaking through. So I've prompted you to unmute your speaker or unmute your microphone. Please unmute your microphone. Thank you.
Okay, does that work now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, my name is Richard Thompson. I'm with the FRRA. I own and operate a business out of 2 buildings in downtown Oroville, both of which are within 200 feet of the levee. So my concern is with the Oroville levee or the Phantom levee, whichever it's called. I'm hoping now that the Corps is involved that we can get an evaluation of that levee, because if that were to be left off of the final report, it would be a serious omission. It's right underneath the dam, and as everybody knows, we've had a hard time financing and getting anyone to look at the situation from an engineering standpoint. So I'm assuming that the Corps, and I don't know if Jennifer is still there, but I'm assuming that the Corps will look at this. They seem to have the resources, both financially and in terms of the engineering ability, to look at this. And I'm assuming and hoping that that will be taken into account. That is, the condition of that levee will be taken into account in their final report and in their when they come up with the final water control manual. So if Jennifer's there, perhaps she could make a comment.
Yes, I am still here. I am not a levy professional. So that question, you can send that question to our email address or our QR code, and we can get the answer to that question. Over.
Okay, well, that would be, I just wanted to make it known that if this study is done without including that, I think there'd be a pretty serious deficiency there. So I hope that whoever is a levy expert will help us all solve this problem around Oroville. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just note that that was referenced earlier in the meeting. I think it was Supervisor Connolly around the Oroville levee. And Tara, it might be helpful to think about, how to zoom in and do a deeper dive on the levee and the discussion of the levee, and one, who's responsible, but then also to what extent does it figure in the water control manual update, and it's clearly a concern for Oroville residents and leaders. Bruce.
I was just going to say on that theme, there is a state entity, the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. Like, would they have a role to play in that, and would that be worth exploring? If that would be a good interface.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and we have had the Central Valley Flood Protection Board present in these meetings. As I recall, part of the challenge is just the jurisdiction of this specific levy, as I remember, falls in sort of between state and, sort of outside of necessarily core state and federal responsibilities. But I think just broadly speaking, given it's a concern and that we all want to understand this better, that could be something to agendize for a future meeting. But any colleagues from DWR like John or anybody else, I don't want to misspeak to Bruce's question.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary. And I'm hoping I can turn it to my colleague, Laura Hollander, who's the Deputy Director for our Flood Management Group. And I see Laura's on here.
Yeah. Looks like it's officially good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laura Hollander. I'm the Deputy Director of Flood Management and Dam Safety for DWR. I'm happy to come back with an agenda item to have a deeper dive on this topic. Secretary, you're correct. In the past, there has been no state or federal involvement to date, except for in 2011, we did provide some funding to the city of Oroville to do a preliminary sort of investigation on the levee, which did recommend that more investigation be done. So happy to work with my team and my colleagues at the Flood Board to come back and discuss this further. I know some of my team has been talking with the Corps about, trying to maybe have this be a pilot through their National Levee Safety Program. So there are things that we are looking at. We do understand and want to assist to the extent we can. We have supported the Corps doing a feasibility study here in the past. So happy to chat further.
Thanks, Laura. It does seem like this would be a great agenda, an important agenda item for a coming meeting, if not the next meeting. So thank you to the public comment and Bruce and others for flagging this. Kara, are there any other public comments?
Yes, probably most appropriately, our next public commenter is Michael Bissett of the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency.
Michael, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good morning. Good afternoon, Secretary Crowfoot, Assemblyman Gallagher, and commissioners. So I was going to ask a similar question to Jenny about how a known deficient levee like the one in the city of Oroville would be factored into the water control manual. And I understand that was already asked, but I actually have incredible good news to report, very timely. It just came in like 10 minutes ago. So earlier this week, I participated in a meeting held by DWR and Robert Bateman and Supervisor Connolly. And as part of that meeting, the city of Oroville levee came up, and Mike Merswa with DWR offered to contact the Corps, who perform a one-time levee safety inspection through their national program. And we were able to quickly get in touch with that individual. I worked with the city staff, the city administrator, to submit a letter request to be part of that inspection program. And we just found out about 10 minutes ago that the Corps accepted the city's levy to be in that program to be inspected next year. So that's really, really good news. And we're setting up some meetings to discuss next steps. So I wanted to highlight that. And also that we are also going to be assisting the city to submit into the Army Corps' Section 165A Continuing Authorities Program, just the main program. We did submit to the pilot and they were not successful in being selected, but we're going to put an application in for the regular program to further, move into, if possible, a feasibility study type situation. So good news there, but to get accepted into the one-time levee inspection, that'll go a long way to better understanding the deficiencies out there and figuring out, next steps. So really appreciate all the information we just discussed. And I guess I'll stop there and turn it back over to you, Mr. Commissioner.
Thanks so much, Michael, and for all of your engagement on these commission meetings. Sabufka is a critical partner, and so look forward to hopefully you participating in this deeper dive on the Oroville levee in a coming meeting.
So I think we have one more public comment from Ron Stork, Friends of the River. Ron?
Should be able to unmute yourself, Ron.
Yep, Ron Stork from Oroville Dam Ad Hoc Committee. This has been a good discussion. I signed up to say something else, but let's just say that reflecting on the discussion we've been having with the Oroville levee, when there's known deficiencies that in the levee system or something like that, it hasn't always resulted in any obvious changes in expected flood operations. For example, the Feather River levee break in the 96 floods. That break occurred along a stretch of levee that the Corps had a few years earlier decided really was about an 80% flow could be safely accommodated, and it failed at roughly 100% flow. But the point is that it did fail, and there were no changes in the manual or changes in the operations to reduce the objective release of the project and the flow down the floodway. And similarly, the existence of a 100,000 acre foot dam that would fail on the American River, the Auburn Dam Coffer Dam, was never taken into account in the flood control manual and operations by reclamation controlled by the Corps. And when that 100,000 acre foot dam failed, and there was suddenly 100,000 acre feet of water in Folsom Reservoir, and there were releases in excess of the objective release, in part because of that. So these are significant issues to work through, and I think it's if you have known deficiencies that make the system not work as expected or contemplated, there needs to be, I think, a public recognition of that, and if possible, some changes in operations to reflect known deficiencies. So once again, good discussion, and thanks for letting me say something a little bit past our time to depart.
Thanks, Ron, for tuning in and for all your engagement in the commission, but then more broadly on this river system over the last few decades. Tara, any other feedback, or I should say public comment?
I'm not seeing any other commenters at this point. All
right. Well, we are 2 or more over time, and I know some of us are kind of toggling and multitasking onto our noontime meetings. I want to thank everybody, those who presented, our wonderful colleagues at Kearns and West for organizing us, and then most importantly, all the commissioners. I think we had a good, clear conversation today. We raised some issues that we're going to tackle here in coming meetings. We'll welcome new commissioners and new elected officials onto this body at our next meeting, which I think will be in person up in Oroville on March 7th. Is that right, Tara?
It will be on March 7th. We are still determining whether it will be in person or virtual. As usual, we will do an in-person meeting at some point next year, but I think which one it will be is still a little bit to TBD.
That sounds good. I mean, we've done a pretty good job on the virtual, and so I feel like this has been a good platform. All right, thanks everybody. Have a wonderful week and weekend and holiday season, and we'll see you again early in the new year.